And now Micah Miller trying to spring a pass ahead. Nobody in front of Jack Paling. Moves on with a blast and scores! Jack Paling with
We aren't giving up on chances, and we just got to bottom line execute.
Waits, passes in front. Great save, Pelosi, as she robs a Gopher in front of her. And that was number 8, Kippen Keller, on the grade A opportunity.
For me as a coach, that's the kind of D you're always looking for, because they don't grow on trees for sure. And he's done a really good job being a captain of a really young team this year.
It was a really cool thing to see for them to really appreciate what I've done on and off the ice.
to the far half wall. Jack Paling trying to play it into the corner. Now Paling turns, squares his body to the slot, sends it up high toward Jack. A shot makes its way through, and they score! Right along the blue line, Nick Paling was in front of the net, and St. Cloud State's got a lead here in the
And hello, Huskies Warming House fans. It's episode number 22. Nick Maxon here again in Minneapolis. Noah Grant joining me from North Dakota. And Noah, do we really have to ask how we're feeling today? It's Saturday. It's finally meaningful playoff hockey. I'm jacked up. I know that Minnesota Wild fans have to wait for tomorrow to really see some action that they'll be tuning into. But, I mean, really, how you feeling? What's been going on?
Yeah, it's awesome. The New York Rangers game, actually, the first one that started us off between the Rangers and Carolina, had a really good pace to it. Heck of a lot of penalties, so hopefully the officials put their whistles away. But, I mean, if that pace is indicative of what we're going to be in store for in the next coming weeks and months, I'm all for it. Definitely, Jack. And also, welcome to those viewing with us for the first time here on YouTube. This is our first ever video podcast that we're doing. And if you're not visiting us on YouTube right now as you're listening to us, well, check out our YouTube page. That would be super awesome. A couple other housekeeping things for you, Nick, as well. We do have a survey going on right now for people to kind of help us out with our show and tell us what they think of our show as we transition to the video format. Very important for us to hear your feedback. Definitely want to hear all the nitty gritty of what you have to say, whether it's super nice or not so nice.
You know, I was told once, Noah, that I had a face for radio. I'm wondering if that will be in some of the comments as we go forward, but happy to hear it. No, we do have some other housekeeping procedures to get around to. First, we need to talk about our two-line fan trivia. Give us an update where we stand on this week's question.
Two-line fan trivia is your chance to win. Follow the Huskies Warming House podcast on Twitter at Warming House Den. A new question will be asked every week. Be the first to tweet us the correct answer. Winners will be mentioned on the show, as well as a chance for prizes and more. One question, one answer, one winner. It's two-line trivia.
Yeah, two-line fan trivia. We're going to read the question off for you. Right here, the winner, of course, now gets a Huskies Warming House hat from the Unreal podcast. Super excited to announce that. Of course, our brand here from the university is Unreal right now, so should be exciting. Hopefully, going to have those out by September, I would think. But the question this week, I'm just going to tell you right now, our winner right away was at Brody Falconer. He has been on his game with this trivia. But in 130 games from 1994 to 1998, Brian Leitza holds a wild record for the St. Cloud State Huskies men's hockey team with the most career wins, 66, and losses in school history. Who are the only other two goalies at St. Cloud State University to have at least 50 career wins? Nick, do you have any idea what the answer to this question is?
Not a clue. I mean, those are impressive numbers as they stand by themselves, but yeah, zero clue what this number could really be.
So very interesting. David Rennick is actually poised to join this club, currently has 49 wins in a Huskies uniform, but the correct answer is Ryan Farragher with 53 and Charlie Lindgren with 51. So really good company that David Rennick would be entering into on that one. So pretty exciting. And Nick, the last housekeeping thing, just to mention briefly, we now are on iHeartRadio. So if you have any iHeartRadio fans, check us out there as well. Hopefully we're going to be on Pandora soon, but podcast is on the up. What can I say?
We're trying to catch KFan, although I think we're going to be a while before we get to their status. But joining them on their same platform again on iHeartRadio, make sure you search for us at Huskies Warming House Podcast. And with that, we have a couple of things here coming up special for this episode, a former Gopher All-American will join us later in the episode today. And with that, I think it's time to bring in the Center Ice View News and Notes.
Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com.
And now to get into those topics here on the Center Ice View News and Notes. First, we have to talk about the Herbrooks National Hockey Center. The practice rink finally got their ice in this week. From what I understand, the main rink will be another couple of weeks before it gets its ice in, but also a couple of improvements that have been made since the lockdown period. So let's fill in our listeners what's happening up near the Granite City area.
Yeah, a couple of improvements just to kind of the overall conditions of both the buildings and the ice surface. The one that really stuck out to me is having that logo jump in on the practice rink. It's, of course, the new St. Cloud State logo, kind of the oval with the Husky in front. I don't know. I think that even more so than having the updates to the rink going on, I think just for me, it's just knowing that similar to the NHL, it just means that Huskies hockey still has a potential chance right around the corner. So that logo signifies more to me on that practice rink than just a Huskies head right now. It signifies the start of college hockey, hopefully. So just super excited to see all the improvements going on to that building, which is a building that does need a fair amount of work just based on the historical nature of what it has, but hopefully it's rocking and rolling in the near future.
It is. They did extend some netting over those benches in the practice rink. They also replaced the coaching boards in the main rink. There's a couple other improvements that they have made. And again, from what we know, August 14th or in and around there, that's when the main ice rink will finally be filled and chilled, ready hopefully for Huskies hockey. But speaking of college hockey, some bigger news coming with the addition of St. Thomas University joining Division I hockey for their men's program, Noah. They will join the CCHA, the new conference set to begin 2021. For the women's, they'll join the WCHA. And I don't think there's really any way you can slice it that is just some really good news for college hockey.
Yeah, the piece of that I'm most excited about is the WCHA finally has a little bit more numbers parity, finally getting to 8 teams in that league. They, of course, last year were at 7. And St. Cloud has even more competition now to be aware of around the state of Minnesota and kind of the upper Midwest-ish region of college hockey. Arguably, and I wouldn't say arguably, probably definitively the best women's hockey league in college hockey in a season-by-season basis. So I'm excited to welcome St. Thomas into that group, excited to have them come into the Herbrooks National Hockey Center, which, like you just mentioned, is going to have a new sheet of ice and some new logos and everything. So hopefully the women's hockey team can find a way to beat St. Thomas and climb up in those rankings. I think they're going to have a really good group this year to look forward to, but yeah, definitely going to see St. Thomas probably, I would hope, in a men's game quite soon as well too in the Herbrooks National Hockey Center, but excited all around for sure.
Yeah, excited that, again, they did get the nod from the NCAA to join Division I. And again, you talk about regionality and college hockey, this adds to it. Again, St. Thomas here in the Twin Cities area, so it's a short drive for whether it's the Gophers, it's Duluth, or even North Dakota, if you want to throw them in there, Mankato as well. So now you have another team that either one of these teams can go and play against each other. And again, just overall good for the college game, especially here in the great region of the state of hockey. Speaking of the NHL and the state of hockey, we were anticipating, Noah, with a lot of uncertainty, what the NHL bubble and what the arenas were going to look like. I know the NHL had really been kind of pumping its own tires about how they were going to present the ice rink, and I know from my opinion, I think it looks pretty freaking good. What would you say when your first impressions with the exhibition games, how it looks in both Edmonton and Toronto?
Yeah, it's fantastic. I think one of the first things that sticks out to me is, watching especially that Carolina and New York game earlier today, the crowd noise, you didn't even really think about the fact that there were no fans. They did such a good job, kind of creating that atmosphere and really keeping the attention and the moment on the players, of course, on the ice surface. But, the amenities obviously are world-class. But one of the things that I'm excited to be wrong about, because I talked about this, leading up to, the stage 4 progression, or the phase 4 progression, I should say, of the NHL and getting into these bubbles, is what a fantastic job the NHL has done to make sure, zero positive cases as we talk here on Saturday, August 1st. In terms of COVID, they're testing, making sure all the players were tested, day in and day out, weeks in advance before getting to the bubbles, and then subsequently after they arrived. So the amenities are nice, and the NHL, I don't say this just to be biased as, a hockey fan. The NHL is probably by far the best league just in terms of the way that they've been able to handle and execute their bubbles in their respective hub cities. So just a fantastic job by the National Hockey League. And you know what that means? It just means playoff hockey for us, and playoff hockey that arguably has a sustainable future, turning into making sure that the Stanley Cup does get hoisted in the coming months. Can't really say the same for a couple of other leagues. Looking at you, Major League Baseball.
No question about it, especially just a couple of weeks ago when a number of folks in Tampa, and then there were some reports of Austin Matthews in Toronto were testing positive. So there was starting to become some uncertainty, as we talked about, Noah, about whether the NHL could really pull this off. And I think now that, the teams that are training camps, more of a controlled environment than they made the trips a week prior. Again, we've had some exhibition games, and now just today getting into the more meaningful, the play-in round has finally started. And again, as you mentioned, zero positive tests as of today. And again, with that bubble type setup, it appears that the NHL is well under control with trying to keep their players and personnel, free and healthy, which is a good thing. Speaking of the NHL, and I think it's important to touch on this because, again, the news of George Floyd, especially here in Minneapolis, has touched not just around the world in social justices. It's touched the NHL, and Minnesota Wild defenseman Matt Dumba, again with some other players, formed what's called the Hockey Diversity Alliance. And before the first play-in game, Noel, we're going to cue up the speech that he made on live TV. He did say a few words, and I think it's important to hear those. So let's tune in and have a listen here real fast.
I know none of us need to be reminded about how our day-to-day lives have been affected by the outbreak of COVID-19. So I hope the Stanley Cup playoffs can bring a little normality and peace of mind during all these times of uncertainty. I'll transition topics to a topic that is very important to me, my fellow members of the Hockey Diversity Alliance, and the NHL. During this pandemic, something unexpected but long overdue occurred. The world woke up to the existence of systematic racism and how deeply rooted it is within our society. For those unaffected by systematic racism or unaware, I'm sure that some of you believe that this topic has garnered too much attention during the last couple months. But let me assure you, it is not. Racism is a man-made creation, and all it does is deteriorate from our collective prosperity. Racism is everywhere. Racism is everywhere. And we need to fight against it. On behalf of the NHL and the Hockey Diversity Alliance, we vow and promise to stand up for justice and fight for what is right. I know firsthand, as a minority playing the great game of hockey, the unexplainable and difficult challenges that come with it. The Hockey Diversity Alliance and the NHL want kids to feel safe, comfortable, and free-minded every time they enter an arena. So I stand in front of you today on behalf of those groups and promise you that we will fight against justice. We will fight against injustice and fight for what is right. I hope this inspires a new generation of hockey players and hockey fans, because Black Lives Matter. Breonna Taylor's life matters. Hockey is a great game, but it could be a whole lot greater, and it starts with all of us.
Certainly some powerful words coming again from the Minnesota Wild defenseman Noah. Just a couple of quick sentences following what he said to the National Hockey League.
Yeah, definitely good to see. I thought it was interesting. Of course, in the new, kind of light of everything that's been going on, Matt Dumba is listed as the first NHL player to kneel after everything that's been going on. But you think back to current Minnesota Wild organizational player JT Brown actually was part of that group, along with Colin Kaepernick, making that move in the early parts of the NHL even years ago. The only thing that I really wanted to add, you look at social media too, and there was kind of some talk about him, how he kneeled for one anthem but not the other, and then there's just some kind of hateful comments too, directed towards him. And I just kind of think about, we don't want to get too political here, but you have your right, to have your opinion, in North America. That's awesome. But what's wrong with working towards equality? That's the only thing I have to say about this. Is Matt Dumba, has taken a positive step forward for the NHL, and I certainly have no problem with him, doing what he has to do. Obviously, it's nerve-wracking being able to sit, much less in an empty building, surrounded by your peers, and be able to give a speech like that. Nerves of steel for Matt Dumba. So good to see him working towards equality, and I hope a lot of other people find that perspective as they move forward to work towards a better future for all of us, not only in hockey, but just worldwide as people.
And I would agree 100%. Very eloquent. I thought what he said was very well worded. Definitely a very difficult position to be in if you're Matt Dumba, and to go out in front before the meaningful games, meaning you have a bigger audience that's watching you, and to be able to say the things that he said, and then again to take that stance, as you mentioned, to take that knee before the American anthem. Again, and I think he said it best, is that, the league is doing great, but it can be better, and it starts with us. And I really like the fact that he's trying to be inclusive from not just the player standpoint, from the coaching staff, the personnel, and even us as fans. Again, I think we all could be better in this new light that we are in post George Floyd. And again, just very powerful statements there from Matt Dumba, and I do agree with what he said there on the NHL Center Ice stage. For our last topic, Noah, going into the Center Ice View news and notes, we got to talk about some trouble in the desert Southwest, and this has to do with the Arizona Coyotes and what seems to be on the surface a very sudden departure from their general manager John Chayka. But from what we know, and mind you, a lot of it has been going back and forth on what we do know, maybe what had happened. It appears that John Chayka has left the organization for maybe some other opportunity, but man, there's been some strong language being put back and forth between now former John Chayka, general manager, and the Arizona Coyotes. So pretty interesting scenario. First impressions on what happened and what maybe you think did transpire in that Arizona Coyote front office.
What the heck is going on in the desert? I have no idea. I mean, this organization has just had its ups and downs of what do you call ridiculousness?
It's insane.
Call it. I mean, it's in the timing, especially. I mean, if this was something, I almost said if this was something that happened in the summer, but here we are in the summer. But if it happened in a normal summer, during the off season, kind of in that in between stage, or if it happened a couple months ago, it would make a little bit more sense to me. But right now, right as the playoffs ramp up, there's definitely some alarm bells going off in my head. And I believe his John Chayka's contract just got renewed by the Arizona Coyotes for the next 3 years, which means, one, he can't be an associate GM or anything of the Seattle Kraken, for all of you wondering that.
It just renewed in November of 2019, so very, very recently.
Yeah, so he can't come back to the NHL in that capacity for the life of that contract. Like you said, pursuing other opportunities, but other opportunities that the Arizona Coyotes gave him. I mean, if you're in a management position or an owner position and you don't want your general manager to pursue other options or leave, well, don't let him take that opportunity. I don't know. Maybe you happen to know more if that opportunity happened to coincide where he could have done. But, it's just interesting to see that development. And I just don't get, why the organization is taking the stance and the hard stance that they are, because John Chayka is kind of the one that serves to win here, just talking about how, kind of foreshadowing us a little bit, saying that, oh, well, there's more to this story when I get a chance to, kind of spill the beans a little bit, or the organization should hopefully make light of what is actually happening, because I'm not the bad guy here. So I think between the two sides, I think it looks worse for the Arizona Coyotes organization, and a group that, say what you want about John Chayka, but he's helped push this team into a playoff contender, has Taylor Hall, at least till the end of the season, and they have an opportunity to be a dark horse in this playoff. So Nick, I don't know what your thoughts are, but for me, it's just a confusing confusing move for an organization that was already kind of mired in doubt by things like their recruiting processes in junior hockey.
True. This is a very interesting scenario because as you laid out, when you're under contract and somebody from the outside wants to talk to your general manager under that contract, the team has to grant whoever that is permission to talk. Now, what we don't know is how did this opportunity come to fruition? Was this out of the blue? Was there previous conversations with John Chayka and this new opportunity that prompted this meeting in person that the Arizona Coyotes organization essentially had to allow permission to? Again, there's a lot that we don't know about the genesis of this whole story. Now, to your point, and I think Elliot Friedman has said the same thing again from Sportsnet up in Canada, which is, was this an opportunity where, as you mentioned, where it was kind of a on the side thing where he could do both? And was it where maybe Arizona said, no, you have to pick one or the other? And Chayka said, well, if you're going to make me pick and choose, I want to go to this opportunity, which obviously seems to hold some more interest in what he's currently doing. So this is a very fascinating story, again, out of Arizona. And, again, with all the different things that this organization has had to overcome, such as arena contracts with the city of Glendale and everything else that they've been through, just add this to the list. Now, on GM John Chayka's tenure, you have some contracts that are kind of goofy. You've got Phil Kessel, which was supposed to come in and provide some offense. I don't think he quite lived up to the hype that he was meant to, nor the contract that he's under with. Taylor Halligan in that trade, that's a pretty big trade. And now with the COVID-19 impact and what could be and what's supposed to be a flat salary cap over the next couple of seasons, you're trying to re-sign a very star player, and you don't have a lot of cap room to do it. And you're going to have restricted free agents coming through too that are going to need some pay increases. So it's putting the Coyotes in a pretty tough situation. And at the end of the day, for this situation to unfold again, he gets his contract extended in November of last year. We're talking 7-8 months ago. And for things to go sour this bad, and I want to refer to John Chayka's statement, because his statement was released after the Arizona statement came forward. And basically the team said he quit on the team, he quit on the fans, and the timing of it was preposterous, and we're just going to look forward to trying to pursue to lift Lord Stanley's Cup. And then Chayka's response was, ownership essentially forced me to do this. So you have two different sides of the story that are out there. And I think what was most peculiar, was John Chayka put a very interesting tidbit, which said, I could issue a future statement with more clarity if it's needed. And that's quite the torpedo in the water for the Arizona Coyotes, which tells me this has more to do about the organization standpoint than it did with John Chayka. So I wanted to get your quick thoughts on just that little bit of a statement from Chayka, especially with him wanting to possibly issue more clarity and more details if he needed to.
Right, exactly my point, and thank you for clarifying that. Kind of going back a little bit real quick too, I know you mentioned Phil Kessel. I think Phil Kessel has also mentioned he's had some injury bugs here too, so hopefully that contract looks better in the coming years. But of course, John Chayka isn't going to be around to see it. But like you mentioned, I think it looks worse on the organization, because I don't know if this comes as a surprise to anybody, but NHL GMs, especially the youngest GM in NHL history, they don't just quit. They don't just get up and vanish, out of here. And if you, not only that, but if you just renewed his contract, less than a year ago, I mean, that just to me spells some sort of ownership dilemma of some sort. And I don't know what the ownership group looks like in Arizona. I mean, I've heard rumblings, that sort of thing. I'm not here to comment on those. But I mean, when you take those ownership potential woes and put it with an organization that has a tough time drawing a fan base in a city that's hard to get to, in a city that doesn't even hardly want them and their arena in that city. I mean, what more can you draw?
It's unbelievable. It's really unbelievable.
Draw for the Arizona Coyotes. And it's really frustrating because the Arizona Coyotes, I mean, they've struggled in their kind of rebuild as of late, and now they're kind of on the up and up, but I mean, they haven't been a slouch of a hockey team. I mean, they haven't been a sleeper hockey team for the last, decade and a half I mean, they had really good playoff appearances, went to a conference final, I believe, in 2012 when Dustin Penner eliminated them. They have some really cool retro jerseys back in the 90s. I love those uniforms. And it's just kind of like they have so many things that they have the potential to build on, and the uniqueness of being in the desert. But gosh, like at what point does the NHL look at this group and say, when do we pull the plug? When do we move this franchise somewhere else? And that's an even more of an issue because you have potential locations in the central part of the United States, like Kansas City, or someplace maybe in Texas that probably has a chance to sustain an NHL franchise with the addition of the Seattle Kraken in the Pacific Division and Arizona potentially moving over to the Central as it is. I mean, you might lose your ticket for a seat at the table if you're the Arizona Coyotes. If this and your recruiting woes with, junior hockey continue, just not a good look for the organization. But they do have Paul Bissonnette, so that's a good thing.
They do have Biz Nasty, as they call him, on Twitter. So certainly a story we'll have to keep following on as that develops and continues to evolve. And with that, it's time to bring in our Healthy Scratch interview, a 4-year Gopher veteran, put up quite an impressive resume in college hockey, spent some time as well in the NHL as well as overseas playing in Europe. Let's welcome current St. Cloud State video analyst Pat Micheletti.
With a new guest joining every week, it's a lineup chock full of players, coaches, fans, and more. This week's special guest is the Healthy Scratch.
And joining us this week in a very special guest lineup here, we do have on the Healthy Scratch lineup the former University of Minnesota Golden Gopher and current St. Cloud State TV analyst, Pat Micheletti. Pat, thanks again for joining us here on the end of July. First of all, how's your summer been, Pat?
Well, it's been interesting. Like everyone else is, just hoping and waiting that, for things to get back to normal, or what we used to know as normal anyway. But it's been good. You learn to do different things, and you read a lot of books, and you walk a lot, and just try to keep yourself busy.
Pat, actually, speaking of kind of keeping busy, you're obviously a pretty staple of a figure in the St. Cloud State broadcasting world, but your brother is also in broadcasting. You both are, one of 9 children. He's your brother, had almost 200 points in 300 games in the WHA and NHL. Not a bad way to spend a life. How nice,
right?
One, to kind of see you both have success in broadcasting, and 2, have you been able to catch up with them at all kind of during the work stoppage with the NHL?
Well, you know what? We've talked probably more now in the last 5 months than during this season because, he's so busy with games and I am. And I know he's chomping at the bit to start calling games for the Rangers and NBC coming up. So, it's one of the best things that I think has happened to me in the broadcasting world and even him. It was the night that we got to call a game together a couple years ago when we called Game 5 of Winnipeg and Minnesota. It was on NBC, which was a highlight for me. And it's just very rare that you find, families that are able to get, 2 brothers doing the same thing and get to work together. And I think it's been great for our family.
Pat, we'll get a little bit more on your hockey career just a little bit, but I want to talk about how you got into broadcasting. I mean, I think, as a player, you play your games, you get towards maybe the end of the career. It's a tough transition nonetheless. But how did the opportunity of broadcasting come about for you once your playing days were done?
Well, I tell you, my career ended abruptly. It was a situation where I gotten hurt 5 days before the '92 Olympic Games, and then I missed the Olympics and missed the rest of our season. Came back and had to have surgery again, and And then when I had surgery, I got done, and the doctor said, "You're done." And it was like, "Are you kidding me?" And I was 29 years old at the time, and right then you just, I wasn't really ready for the next phase, and I love the game. I wanted to stay in the game, but I didn't think that I had the mindset to be a coach. And so and I didn't want to, be on the road scouting. So my next best bet was, well, let's give this a crack. And Joe and I had conversations, and so he kind of steered me, how to get going on it. And I really enjoyed it after doing, the first couple games that I did for the University of Minnesota. I fell in love with it because it was something where I could, maybe help explain to the fans what was going on, why it was going on, what might have to happen. And so for me, I look at it as a way to, kind of coach both teams, if you will, from the booth, and really let people know some of the nuances about the game. And so I just, and then at the end of the night, as a player, you go home if you lose, and you're upset, you're thinking about it, and, but when you're broadcasting, I leave the game and I try to look at it when I broadcast. Obviously I'm going to pull for the team that I'm broadcasting for, but I run into a lot of situations where I'm broadcasting games that I have no skin in the game, and I can go home at the end of the night and assess how I did and move on the next day without any stress. So from that standpoint, it's been great.
It's kind of funny. Nick and I had just had that conversation too, where when we got into the broadcasting world, it's like you finish your playing career and then you're like, well, I have all this knowledge. Now what do I do with it? So broadcasting is
right.
a way to, give back. But let's go back to your playing career. 160 games for the Gophers, almost 270 points, second in Gopher history. Do you look back on that time? Obviously, the statistics speak for itself, but did you ever feel like you were this upper echelon player for the Gophers, or were you just trying to put your best forward every night and, do the best that you can?
It really didn't hit me. I'd always been a scorer or a point producer. And I just thought that was what I did. Okay. And it really didn't hit me that I was that far up, let's say, in the Gopher rankings, until someone brought it up to me midway through my junior year or senior year. It was, hey, you're only, X amount of points away from Mace, which is all-time leader. I'm like, what are you talking about? Because I never looked at, the stats of former players or anything like that. I just played because, I looked at it. How do I help my team the most? What's my role? And my role is to be an offensive guy on a team and help the team that way. So, I love playing the game so much that it did. That stuff really didn't really hit me until people started bringing it up to me, and to be right next to John Mayasich. Is, in my opinion, the greatest player to ever come out of the state of Minnesota. And it was just, you think about it more so years after, you say, geez, it's funny because there were a lot of great guys who played at Minnesota. And 9 of them happened to be on the 1980 Olympic team. And I got to know those guys really, really well because they all played with my brother Don and Joe, for that fact. And I was always around those guys, and I was always in awe of them. And I still, when I run into guys today, whether it be Bill Baker or Rob McClanahan or any of those guys, Neil Broughton, Phil Vercoda, Buzz Schneider, I'm still to this day in awe of them, and I tell them that, and they laugh at me, and they say, "Well, I think you're okay," and I'm like, "Well, you don't know the influence that those guys had on my career."
Pat, speaking of influence, every player, when you look back at your playing career, and especially when you're playing 4 years at a major university, as you did at the U of M, is there one game or one moment that sticks out in particular as a moment or a game that you remember most?
Well, yeah, it's kind of sentimental to me, kind of hokey, if you will, but not to me, obviously. It was the last game that I played in Mariucci. Well, yeah, the old Mariucci Arena, and it was senior night, and my dad, throughout my career, just kind of left it alone, never got involved. You listen to your coaches, you do what they say. If you're wrong, you're wrong. Type guy, and was never got involved at all. And I remember him when he came on the ice. I'd never seen any emotion out of him. And my mom was always, cheering and very, very stoic. And I could see a little tear go down to my dad's eye, and I just said, "Okay, tonight this one's for you." And we ended up beating North Dakota 6-0. And I had 4 goals and 2 assists that night. And tonight, and it was just like, wow, it just something drove me that night, and it was for him because I was the last of 9 kids, and that was it for all the kids going to college, and going to all those games, and so yeah, that was, if there's one night that would be the one that would stick out the most.
Certainly can't complain about beating North Dakota too. I don't think anyone worry about that. But after you moved on from the University of Minnesota, you had a pretty good season actually in the AHL, and then a couple of Minnesota North Stars in Kalamazoo, ultimately ending up in 1989 and 1990 in Italy with over 170 points in less than 100 games. Can you kind of take us through that stage of your career? And 1, what was it like to be in the NHL? And 2, what was Italy like?
Well, we'll start with the North Stars. I signed my contract about 4 hours after my last college game. And in fact, it was kind of funny. The national championship was out in Providence that year. And so I signed that night and literally flew home to Minnesota with the team. And the next day flew right back out to Springfield, Massachusetts, which was, right down the road from Providence, and started my career there. It was the first year was a learning experience down in the American League. You always think that, you're ready to make the jump. They wanted me to show I could score down there. And it was a real learning season. I learned a lot out of that year. And in the pros is a different animal than college. I can tell you that much. And ask any player, they will tell you the same thing. It's one of those situations where sometimes whether you're good enough, not good enough, whatever the case may be, you really need someone in your corner to give you that boost. My second year, I got hurt in training camp, tore knee ligament, was out the first half of the year, ended up going down to Kalamazoo because they switched minor league teams. And I think I had like 14 goals in 10 games, something like that. And so I got called up and, was up for pretty much a remainder of the season. I think I was up for 20 games, played in 12. And then I had an opportunity to go to Europe, and I had to weigh whether I was going to get a legit shot and stick with the North Stars, or kind of be a guy that went up and down. And At the time, Dino Ciccarelli, Hall of Famer, was up with the North Stars, obviously, and we're about the same size and same type of player, and I kind of thought right there, they're probably not going to keep two guys of our stature, size, up there. And I didn't want to go back to the minors, and I had an opportunity to go to Italy and play on their national team, their Olympic team, and I thought I could prolong my career a little bit because the schedule wasn't as hectic, and plus I wanted to see Europe, and so it was a decision that I made. I could have re-signed with the North Stars, but opted not to. Went over there and played 4 years. Unfortunately, I hurt my knee, and it got to the point where I needed a knee replacement, and I had to retire.
Pat, you've experienced a lot of hockey from your youth to college to pro and now into broadcasting, many years in that. What about the evolution of the game sticks out to you so much? I mean, at least for me, it's about the speed of the game. But for you, who's been around this game for such an extended period of time, what has changed the most about the game of hockey since you've played and now watching it as an analyst?
Well, the speed and the skill and the strength of the guys and the equipment and is all improved, all for the better. I think the depth of the player has improved. I can recall back in college when I played, there was a drop off after your top six. And now we're seeing, guys that are still pretty darn good, playing on a fourth line and contributing a lot. And I think depth has been the biggest factor. And not everyone had the speed that everybody can skate now. Everyone can skate. You have the ability to skate, then it really it makes up for a lot of mistakes. You can really cover up a lot of mistakes that guys make because they have the ability to get back in a play or whatever the case may be. And that's a big difference I see in the game today.
Pat, you talk about the changing players and kind of especially the strength aspect and expanding career longevity. It's something that you really unfortunately didn't get to experience in your career. Can you kind of take us through your early 30s and talking about what not only ended your career, but then kind of your transition through life after that?
Well, I ended up, and I'm on, I've had 14 knee operations, 9 on one and 5 on the other. And, it was hard. It was hard to, say goodbye to the game that you love so much. And there's really nothing you could do about it. It just got to a point where, it was done. Once you lose your legs, you're pretty much toast in this game. So, I had to quit. I had to retire, I should say, from playing. And it was a difficult transition because my goal was to play, till at least over in Europe till I was, upwards over 35 years old. So I lost probably 8 to 9 years of playing. And so, it took some time. Thankfully, I stayed in the game, just not as a player. And I think that really helped my transition, going forward.
Pat, we talk a lot, especially nowadays, about developmental leagues and how they best prepare players to make the next jump into the pro leagues, the AHL, and more obviously the bigger one, the NHL. As far as college hockey is concerned, from then when you played to now, how good is college hockey as far as a developmental league and getting players ready to make the jump to the pros, AHL and NHL, respectively?
Well, the shift has changed to the point where these NHL teams would love to keep kids in college as long as they can, unless you're a number one draft pick and you're going to make that jump. I think they would rather. They know how good a coaches that we have. That's a one big change to, and taking nothing away from the coaches that were there in a different era, but these coaches now today are really good. I don't know of a bad coach in college hockey, and the NHL managers know that, because a lot of the NHL managers played in college, and so I think they trust the college coach. They trust to develop them. They communicate so much better than they did in the olden days, and they don't have to pay them. They don't have to pay them yet, and so that college hockey has been great for the NHL teams, and we're seeing a lot more Canadian kids and Europeans, for that matter, come over here and show their wares and develop in college hockey.
You get a chance to see, the University of Minnesota and excuse me, and St. Cloud as well. The transition in 2013 from the old WCHA to the new NCHC, it's been a big hot topic even today. What are your kind of thoughts about that? Not only that transition, but then kind of, has it affected that growth of the college game in readying players for the NHL, or is it even better than the old WCHA?
I'm trying to be politically correct, and typically I'm not. Josh Fenton, the NCHC, is a terrific league, and it might be the best in college hockey. I'm for game. I'm for game, to succeed. I think when you look at the state of Minnesota, and now we can add St. Thomas into the mix, we will have 6 Division I teams. I think, especially now, when you have a St. Cloud, a Mankato, even Bemidji this year, that was going to make the NCAAs, right? St. Cloud was a bubble team, but just year in and year out, you've got the top teams in the country. I think having those teams play on a weekend by weekend basis would excite people than a Western Michigan coming into St. Cloud. Nothing against Western Michigan. I'm just using them as an example. And would just create the excitement that college hockey really, really needs. And I think that, talk to a lot of coaches, and they don't disagree. They do agree. But, and I'm not going to blame the Big Ten Conference either, because there used to be a Big Ten Conference back in the early 70s. So I just think that if we put our heads together, we can come up with a way to regionalize the sport a little bit, like it should be. It would create more excitement. It would be better for the game. We're not college football. We're not college basketball. We don't get the television, national television that these sports get, which generate more revenue. I just think that we're missing out on a great opportunity. There was nothing better, guys, and you both know this, in the WCHA championship that was held at the Xcel Energy Center or the St. Paul Civic Center before that. There's nothing better. It was as good or better than the national championship. And we have great teams with great coaches, with great leaders, and with great players. And those rivalries, I don't think you could find anywhere.
Speaking of rivalries, Pat, we had Bob Moutz go on a couple of weeks ago. He talked the exact same things that you described, more regional games. He was in favor of creating an exhibition schedule, which would pin these teams that were in close proximity to each other. And, I think we all could agree that that's a good strategy moving forward. But with St. Cloud, and we talk about excitement around this team that it currently has with Brett Larson coming up on his third season, just who's a player to watch this season coming up as long as we have the college season upcoming, and who is the best player on the team right now in your eyes on St. Cloud State's roster?
Well, they have a lot of different players, and it's hard to say one. One guy I think has a boatload of a potential. It has the ability to score from anywhere on the ice is Ethan Brodzinski. I think he is a player that is really starting to mature, and I think he's got a real big upside, to his future. Sam Henches is very exciting to watch. His game has really evolved. Remember, he was hurt pretty much, in his freshman year, and came on, really started to come on late in his freshman year. And last year, he did some things that, blew me away, with his speed. There's still parts of his game. He's got to learn to finish a little bit better. But the Minnesota Wild got a steal with him in the 6th, 7th round, something like that. So I think they're a real balanced team now. They're different than they were, a couple of years ago when we saw the magical team that they had, and unfortunately lost. Which, guess what? Teams lose sometimes, which is unfortunate. But I thought by far they were the best team in the country 2 years ago. And, I think Brett has done and his staff have done just a terrific job at recruiting. And they're going to be a team to really keep an eye on this year, because they've got, David Rennick back, who's being pushed by a couple guys. And but David, when he's on his game, and you guys both know, you better have a good goaltender, especially come playoff time. And I think David is really, he's going to be one of the top goalies in college hockey. And, when you can hang your hat on that every Friday and Saturday night, that gives the coach a little more breathing room, a little more comfort. So I'm looking forward to watching St. Cloud this year and see how those younger guys really come into their own, especially that freshman class, who I thought at times was really good, at times were really freshmen. And so, let's see how they matured over the summer. But I think they're going to have a real strong team.
I'm glad you mentioned Sam Hench's 7th round draft pick of the Minnesota Wild.
Yep.
Speaking of the Minnesota Wild, I'm sure you've been following them at least a little bit as the NHL gets ready to ramp up, obviously this week. What do you kind of think about the Minnesota Wild, not only their chances for this play-in / playoff format, but ultimately going forward with, Kaprizov joining the mix, and then this crop of young guys that they have to build on moving forward?
Yes, we did get the pronunciation correct. It is Kaprizov. That's what he's going with. So that'll probably change 100 times. I'm really intrigued. I'm really intrigued by this playoff. And that's why I wanted hockey to come back this summer, for the fact that you have 24 teams. You've got teams that have been off now for 5 months. We just don't know what we're going to get. And I quite frankly, I think there's going to be upsets in that first round. I think that it's not going to be as high scoring as some might think. I think whatever team, and I guess it's cliche, but you find a goalie who gets hot, a team that has all 28 guys engaged. Now their rosters are 28, but you're gonna need everybody, And so I think the team that finds its game early, the team that can really stick together, the team that in the third period can hang in there and not get mentally tired, and that's where you find mistakes being made. I think coaching is going to be, at a level that we have not seen before, because these coaches are really going to have to know their team, know their personnel, and make the right decisions. So, those factors, which are a lot, it really intrigues me.
Speaking of intriguing, Pat, I think one of the primary matchups from the Minnesota and Vancouver series that I'm looking forward to will be Vancouver's young center Elias Pettersson being matched up with Minnesota's Joel Eriksson, who's really evolved into quite the shutdown center. Often still developing in his young game, but on the defensive side of the puck, he's going to have quite the test, and a very talented and a very good center in Elias Pettersson. Are there any other matchups that you might be looking at when you're looking at that series, or what do you think about that matchup between those two players as well?
Well, you mentioned Pettersson, and so always the talk when you talk about Vancouver, you're talking about the electric Quinn Hughes back on defense. You're talking about their captain Bo Horvat. You're talking about Brock Besser, right? But one player that we forget and has been great against the Wild this year has been JT Miller. He's been really, really good. I was kind of hoping that the Wild would find a way to get him before he went to Vancouver. But he's a really good player, and he's big and he's strong. He can skate, and he can score. He's having his best year offensively. So Vancouver has a lot of weapons. If I were to look at Vancouver, they're a little leaky defensively, and I think the big key in the series is for Minnesota to get their forecheck going and put a lot of pressure on Vancouver's defense, because I think they can exploit them. Especially a guy like Hughes, who really is in his rookie year. Okay. And we'll still call it his rookie year. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but he skates like the wind. But I tell people, if you put pressure on a defenseman, it makes it very difficult. When he doesn't have the extra second, to move the puck or skate it out or whatever. So, for me, I think Minnesota's gonna just muck and grind it up, and I think that's going to have to be their game, and try to get one past Markstrom, who is terrific all season long for Vancouver.
A couple of college guys you mentioned there that have transitioned to the NHL. Once again, we thank you for joining us. Only a couple more questions for you.
Yep.
This one's kind of a two-parter. First of all, going back to college hockey, if St. Cloud and Minnesota match up in the national championship, who are you cheering for internally? And number two, speaking of broadcasting, what's one opportunity that you would love to be able to experience as a broadcaster?
I kind of had it, I'll answer the last question first. When I had the opportunity to do a game with my brother Joe, on NBC Sports, that was a pinnacle. Now, would I like to get 50 more of those, a year? Of course, but to be able to analyze a game with my brother on national television, was something I'll never forget. I know he won't forget it, and it would be great to be able to work with him again, and it's been great. To your first question, well, I tell you what, I broadcast, basically for both teams. I do some radio when I'm not on TV duty. Listen, I'm not a player anymore, and so for me, I would love to see a national championship game between St. Cloud and Minnesota, and I have a great relationship with the people in St. Cloud, and Brett and the university's been great to me, St. Cloud State, and so has the University of Minnesota. So you know what? You can't pick a winner. Can't pick a winner.
Pat, final question for you. And again, thank you for joining us. As we approach the fall here, and again, we're a few days from the calendar turning to August, which I think for some of us can't come soon enough as, again, the NHL ramps up and the prospect of college hockey coming back is, again, drawing nearer to us. Do you see a challenge in college hockey playing out the 2020-21 season with all of the surrounding implications with coronavirus behind us? And what do you think will be the key to actually playing out a full season if you are the one in charge of college hockey?
I'm scared. I'm terrified, and I'm worried about the state of all college sports. To be quite honest with you, if football does not go, I think it's going to play a huge role in whether hockey gets going. And I'm worried about schools being able to continue hockey, and that's why. I really think, and I think the people in charge are thinking of ways, but we've got to find a way to keep it going. Should we not start on time? And like I said, we've got 5 teams here in the state of Minnesota. I'm all for, and it's out there, but if we have to do something where, not get rid of leagues, but just say, okay, due to this circumstances, get your schedule together and call it independent, call it whatever you want, but have the ability to come back to your league the following year. I think we really have to, with the 5 schools here, let them all play each other. Get a schedule that's going to get you to 25 games, be NCAA eligible. Find a way to make it work, okay? And if we have to go back to the Big Ten, the NCHC, what'll be the new CCHA next year, well then fine. But keep the Michigan schools. You got them all there. Let them all play each other. You've got all the Minnesota schools in North Dakota and Wisconsin. Close enough where we can bus and do the things that we have to do. Let's find a way to make it work. And then reevaluate next season.
Pat Micheletti, much agreed. As long as we can have some form of college hockey, I think all of us hockey fans will enjoy that. And that will wrap up this segment here on the Healthy Scratch. Pat Micheletti, again, former Gopher, current St. Cloud State hockey analyst. Again, Pat, thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Hey, my pleasure, guys. I look forward to doing it again. Let's do it again.
Let's do it again. Yes, Pat. Thanks again for joining us.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Take the Huskies Warming House podcast wherever you go. Find the newest episodes or listen to your favorite on iTunes and Podbean. Get all the latest news and updates at huskieswarminghousepodcast.com and look for our Facebook page, the Huskies Warming House Podcast, as well as our Twitter feed at Warming House Den. Our Twitter feed will host trivia, updates, and questions for fans, as well as a mailbag where you can tweet us anytime with your questions, concerns, or listener suggestion. And for business inquiries, email us at huskieswarminghousepodcast@outlook.com.
And once again, thank you to Pat Micheletti, again, in this week's Healthy Scratch interview. Always a joy to talk to a guy who had so much influence on the college hockey game, and he continues to be around it again. Very fortunate to have him in the press box up there at Herb Brooks National Hockey Center. Noah, just a fantastic human being.
Yeah, I really had to chuckle. I'm sure most fans noticed early in that interview. Of course, his dog started barking. He gave his dog a treat right time, kind of hoping that she wouldn't make noise. But she stayed relatively quiet, I would say, just a small stretch. But glad Pat Micheletti wasn't quiet with us. And like you mentioned, always fun to be around him. And I mean, he's a guy that you can walk up to and talk hockey, and he'll talk your ear off. Always wants to know how the rodents are doing, as he refers to the Minnesota Golden Gophers. But
yes, he does.
Very fun to be around, and just happy to think about when talking with Pat Micheletti that NHL and college hockey has hopefully a sustainable chance in the near future.
And speaking of sustainable chance, we've talked earlier about how the NHL bubble was working. Again, the big other news we didn't talk earlier is the American Hockey League, or the NHL minor leagues, is projecting to start their season on December 4th. Again, the NHL looking to start the 2020-21 season December 1st. Again, that's projected dates. Well, what we do know is the bubble scenarios in the NHL and the NBA are working really, really well. And that's some positive news. It means we can sit back and watch 3 or 4 hockey games as a single night, and it's fantastic. It's really good hockey right now. What isn't working is Major League Baseball, Noah. And, for what it's worth, I mean, I get that with baseball, it's probably a little bit more difficult to do a bubble type scenario. But, there's a lot of talk right now that Major League Baseball could indeed be in concern of canceling the season. And I think, first of all, let's get your reaction on that, number one. And number two, we have to talk about an incident that happened with 2 former World Series fellows. We'll get to that in just a moment. But do you think Major League Baseball can finish the 60-game season?
Gosh, I hate to be, you're putting me in the position of being the skeptic again. But for real.
That's what I do best, man.
For real, I feel skeptical about that.
Remember, I'm the demotivator. That's me, so. Absolutely.
And kind of going into your second point, which for those of you who haven't guessed what we're going to talk about, it is going to be Joe Kelly. But I've got a question. Is Major League Baseball like the Arizona Coyotes of sports leagues right now? I mean, they've got a bad look going now. Hey, man.
Oh, man.
I'm just saying, they've got a really bad look to them right now. Just with, having players that violated their protocol to not go out, in Atlanta, and you've got a bunch of players that are getting sick. And granted, like you mentioned, the difficulty in getting, teams within one city or within one bubble as far as Major League Baseball is concerned, it's really challenging. And, you have to acknowledge that, and you have to take that in stride, knowing that that's your biggest hurdle that you're going to face with a sport with such a big roster like Major League Baseball. But with that, and then as we transition right here into the Joe Kelly situation, like what good news is coming out of Major League Baseball? I mean, we had good news about baseball for like 2 days when it started, and then it was already like, oh yeah, hey, you remember that COVID thing that we were so worried about? It's back.
So hold on a second. The Joe Kelly thing isn't good news, and here's what I mean by that. Somebody finally made somebody on Houston pay for what they did. I want to talk about, and here's why the Joe Kelly thing to me is so important to discuss. It shows when the governing body, and if we talk about this in the NHL with the Department of Player Safety, most recently the Matt Tkachuk and Matt Cassian fiasco, and how Cassian was indeed suspended.
Zach Cassian.
What was that?
Matt Cassian.
Something like that. Anyway, so at the
his lesser known brother. No, it's Zach Cassian. Anyway.
Zach Cassian, that's right. It's still afternoon, and we're just going to go with that. But yes, I mean, at the end of the day, the referees didn't call any penalties on Matt Tkachuk. Zach Cassian finally says, you know what? If you're not going to protect me, I'm going to protect myself. And at the end of it, there has been some animosity around all Major League. Once this news about the Astros came to fruition, after the Major League Baseball themselves did a very large investigation, and not just players within the Houston organization, but Alex Cora, again, the Boston bench boss who was with the Astros organization, lost his job as manager of the Red Sox. There was a lot of consequences that came down, but they still felt like there was something missing with the players, right? The people were actually participating, in the cheating that essentially got them the title. And again, the Dodgers, their World Series opponent in 2017. Now let's be frank. Joe Kelly couldn't find the plate that night. He was having trouble, and it just almost seemed like he clicked something in his head and wanted to make some type of a statement with the Astros. Do I agree that there had to have been some type of consequences? Yes, he should have been fined. I think a 1 game, or maybe I would even say 2-game suspension would have been fine. 8-game suspension? Are you freaking kidding me, Noah Grant? I mean, what is Major League Baseball sending as far as a message when, again, you don't hold any players accountable? Yes, you hold folks in front offices and also some people in management situations accountable, but the players themselves, nothing. Joe Kelly obviously makes a statement. There was some words exchanged, and he gets an 8-game suspension. Your thoughts on this? And if it's not 8 games, what do you think should have been the consequences for Joe Kelly, if any?
Well, first of all, I don't know if you've seen the shirts that have come out lately of Joe.
I have.
Little pout on his face. Maybe we'll have to roll the clip while we're doing this and kind of just show people,
I think we should, honestly. It's yeah.
The one thing that I know a couple people have really mentioned, and at first I was kind of like, this is ludicrous. The Astros shouldn't have cheated. Like, get out of here. He definitely deserved to have a ball thrown at him. The one thing, and like you mentioned, Joe Kelly could not find the plate, especially with his fastball.
No.
Game. The one thing, as I thought about it a little bit more, that at looking at the play, that maybe has some sort of credence to it, is there's a place to hit players. If you're going to intentionally throw at them, and that's kind of the midsection area of their body, kind of around their hip, their waist, just above their waist, and that ball was not going at their waist.
No, it was buzzing the tower.
Right, and that's the thing that as I thought about it a little bit more, I think people might be a little bit right about is, I get you want to take matters in your own hands. I get how BS it is that the Astros cheated. I totally agree. But baseball, when you throw a projectile, especially like Joe Kelly does, near 100 miles an hour, I mean, you can kill somebody. I mean, let's be real. You can kill somebody here. So like that's the only piece of this that I kind of feel like Joe Kelly was in the wrong, is don't throw at people's heads. That's the only thing. But other than that, screw the Astros, man. I mean, they deserved every bit of what that treatment was, besides getting a ball thrown at their head. But to paint a picture then that the Astros, they've had their time, they've gone through their woes of going through the cheating scandal, you don't need to throw a ball at them to, be justified and that sort of thing. BS. We only get a third of a season or whatever it is to heckle these guys. I mean, it's ridiculous.
And it's virtually heckling. You can't even be in the stands to do it. So, and I can't imagine you're going to, attach a speaker box to the cardboard cutouts out there that are in the stands, and that's not going to do you much good.
The Astros have here, and sorry if you're a Houston fan, but whatever. The biggest challenge the Astros have this season is now, because all their Zoom and their technical guys aren't actually on site, their buzzers are going to be late. They're going to be a pitch behind now this year.
Oh, jeez.
No, I mean, props to Joe Kelly. I mean, don't throw at people's heads, but other than that, I mean, the right move, but that suspension is it's egregious. And again, that's where that look of the MLB is. If the MLB says, all right, you know what, if you want to take matters in your own hands, we don't condone that, but that's whatever. You're going to get a 2-game suspension and a fine or something like that. I think that's fair. And I think that, pitchers can justify that if they feel that they want to take the game into their own hands. Obviously Major League Baseball is never going to do something like that where they're going to advocate for injuring other players. But I mean, it's like you mentioned, it's similar to in hockey. When you feel the refs do not have control of a hockey game, why do you think enforcers in NHL hockey, and still now they're not enforcers anymore, but guys who can, pick them up and put them down in terms of the fisticuffs game are concerned in NHL hockey, somebody's going to get punched in the face if they need to be punched in the face. And Joe Kelly, his punch was a baseball, but nonetheless, I mean, props to him.
I want to comment on a couple of things that we haven't touched on yet. Ken Rosenthal, again, legendary MLB writer for The Athletic, and he was taking a lot of heat when he was trying to explain why Major League Baseball was giving Joe Kelly the 8-game suspension. And from what he described is that I think MLB knew this was eventually going to happen, meaning some team, whether it was the Dodgers and Joe Kelly or somebody else, was going to try to make a statement that, hey, we did not appreciate you cheating. You won a World Series because of it, and guess what? You still get to keep the trophy and all the glory that you so-called earned, right? And now, what does it say for Major League Baseball that you had to make basically an example out of Joe Kelly? And that to me is where I think fans are like, what in the heck? Like, this doesn't make sense. Because Major League Baseball, if you do anything to hold the players accountable, and you don't do anything less than vacate the World Series title from the Astros, then what message are you really sending? I think baseball thinks, and granted, as you mentioned, baseball's in a whole different funk right now. I don't even think you can compare it to Arizona. It's not even on the same planet. But in the same sense, baseball was like, well, we're going to kind of do it this way. We're going to, consequent to people who maybe would have been the ringleaders, if you want to call it. And then as the players themselves do this, we'll say, hey, you can't do that. They already did their time. The people who were responsible for it, they've already had their repercussions, so don't do that. And it's sort of like in this case when, a big suspension, I'm trying to remember the last big NHL suspension.
It probably would have been, honestly,
Rafi Torres, maybe?
No, probably Dennis Weidman when he ran over that official.
Sure. Multiple games, 10, 12 games. And I still think, was it Rafi Torres almost a whole season, or was it 20 or so games that he had once before for some illegal checks to the head?
Him and Matt Cook.
Exactly. And it's these kind of statement type suspensions where now it's not the officiating, the umpires, it's now the league saying, okay, we have to do something to discourage other teams from doing this. And that's essentially why it's 8 games. I mean, it's pretty obvious that was the intention of this. But I mean, and again, for Twins fans, it was a high unintentional pitch that ended Kirby Puckett's career. I still remember watching that game. And we know that, as you mentioned, a nearly 100 mile an hour fastball getting you anywhere, especially in the upper, there could do some serious damage. So again, I agree that there had to have been some kind of consequences, but 8 games? I don't know. I think 2 games, and you could have easily just put out a statement. You could have talked to the teams and in like an internal memo that says, hey, if this happens again, then guess what? This will be more dire consequences. I don't know. That's the way I would approach it if you're Manfred. Do you agree with that, or would you have approached this a little bit differently?
The beauty of baseball, comparative to other sports, and not to say that this can't happen in other sports, but as we know with hockey, right, in the NHL especially, if you don't like somebody, you can drop the gloves and you can punch them in the face. Like that's part of the rules of the game of hockey. Out of for another day. Out of the 4 major sports, though, the next closest sport I think that really has that opportunity to do that is Major League Baseball, where you've seen the bench clearing brawls, where things, obviously the MLB doesn't want that, but part of me is kind of like, if you start to make an example of guys like Joe Kelly and say like, hey, you can't throw pitches at these guys, or you can't do anything like that. Well, I think that's what that comes to, then, is where teams are going to try to goat the Astros into jumping out of their bench or doing something. And obviously sometimes that starts with a pitch, but it might be more at where I think that these teams are going to try to create that havoc to see, well, if we can't do anything with the equipment that's been provided to us to injure Astros players, well, then we're going to use ourselves and start some sort of brawl. And Major League Baseball, to the fans' delight, I think, can have those bench clearing brawls. So I think that's what you're going to see it come to if you kind of keep making an example of these players. Obviously, the league is in a very difficult position because they can't advocate, for players to hurt each other, but they have to know what's coming. So it's like, how do you strike that balance? Is it with the umpiring crew? Where is that balance to where that the Astros are going to be held accountable by the other players, but at the same time, nobody's getting hurt or maimed or that sort of thing in a way that, because we think about, like, oh, we can't stand the Astros. I can't believe that we did this. But at the same time, not even just talking about a bad look for the league, but what would we have done if Joe Kelly would have ripped a 100-mile-an-hour fastball and Jose Altuve is lying motionless with blood on his face, And I don't want to advocate for the Astros cheating, but it's also, you have to think about, the players are going to find a way to do this. How do they do it in a way that is cathartic for everybody except the Astros, and then everybody can take their slice of pie and move on, I guess, if that makes any sense.
It does, and I don't know if the league is in a position to do that, as you mentioned. I think the bigger question is, how often and how long is this animosity going to last with the cheating scandal? I think Joe Kelly is just the start of it, honestly. And I don't say that because I want that to happen. I just feel that the players just have an extra grind with the Dodgers or excuse me, not the Dodgers, the Astros. But at the end of the day, like you mentioned, they're going to do what they're going to do. And I think it's important for Major League Baseball. They're going to have to be ready for more of this. And the question is, how are they going to address those other instances, and what type of consequences are they going to dish out? Does that mean that, are they going to start to fine organizations? Maybe. Are they going to have to maybe do some type of, same type of similar suspensions as long as Joe Kelly, 8 games? I think it's going to have to come down to, like I mentioned before, where you're going to have to, as a league, issue some kind of pretty much stop doing this type statement. But again, that puts them in a difficult position in how you word that, and how you don't condone the cheating, but you also don't condone possibly severely injuring somebody. And as you mentioned with Kirby Puckett, that was a career-ending injury. And as you mentioned, had Alex Bregman or Jose Altuve been hit in the head and caused a severe injury, this conversation is totally different. And we're talking probably the opposite, honestly, Noah. Is it only 8 games, or should he be suspended for longer? I think that's a very possible avenue where that conversation could have been. So good news is nobody was hurt. I think that's important. Yeah. But I think baseball has a pretty tall task on hand to try to curb what probably is more to come here against the Houston Astros.
Right, and I used Altuve as an example. I think it was Carlos Correa was the other batter on that one, so apologies. But you know what that means, Nick? If you're sick of baseball, if you're sick of this ridiculousness in August, there's hockey on right now. So
there is.
Go check it out. That's all I'm saying.
That's right. Minnesota again at 9:30 Sunday night, game 1 against the newly for those who know English, but the revamped young power Vancouver Canucks. Again, Elias Pettersson, Brock Besser, JT Miller, who I think is a pretty big dark horse for that team. And then again, in the back end, you've got Quinn Hughes, again, part of one of the more up-and-coming defensive superstars in the league. And then again, Jacob Markstrom defending their goal for the Canucks. And then Minnesota Wild, again, it looked like Kevin Fiala in the one exhibition game was looking pretty rock solid. There's still the want to see Kirill Kaprizov on the ice. They won't ever see him in this bubble scenario. But again, looking good is Kevin Fiala. Hopefully he picks it up. A couple other players, again, Zach Parise, Eric Stahl. Just to mention, sounds like Alex Stalock will get the initial start. But want to see, I think this has a 4 or 5 games all over it. So I think it's going to be closer than people think. Noah, what are your thoughts on the upcoming series between the Wild and the Canucks?
Just very briefly here, Alex Stalock definitely deserves a start. I'm happy, that he's in there. Make or break player for the Minnesota Wild. It's going to be Kevin Fiala, no doubt about it. I think Kevin Fiala. I think Alex Galchenyuk might play a bigger role than people realize in this series too. And for me, how quickly can Ryan Suter find his game? Because I think for me, obviously he's a very solid defenseman, but I think there are times where he really disappears when he's really struggling. So those are going to be the keys for me. But I got to say, Nick, Minnesota Wild in 5 for sure.
Minnesota Wild in 5 for sure. So with that prediction, the Minnesota Wild in 5, I'm going to go with Vancouver in 4, just because I love to go against you and see that face frown. So with that being said, that will wrap up this week's episode number 22 on the Huskies Warming House podcast. Again, for Noah Grant, I'm Nick Maxon. First episode on YouTube. Check us out. Also on the Huskies Warming House podcast.com. And we will see you folks again next week. Thanks for joining us. And hello, Huskies Warming House fans. It is time for episode number 2. Nick Maxon here hosting along with Noah Grant from North Dakota. And Noah, I don't really think, do we really have to ask the question today about really how we're feeling? Because, man, I'm jacked up.
Hold on. You said episode 2.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought I said 22. Are you serious? All right, take 2 this time. That's going to go in the blooper.